Let's take a look into section 5B, which is titled, Should You Believe a Statistical Study? Now, you've got to realize that most statistical research is carried out with integrity and with care. However, it's very complex and bias can arise in many different ways. So here are some guidelines that might help you answer the question, should I believe a statistical study? Now, you don't need to memorize these guidelines. We're just going to use these guidelines or read through them and then go through the homework together to get an understanding of things that can occur in a statistical study. So let me pause and get rid of this error. All right, so let's check out these 8 guidelines. So first guideline to should you believe a statistical study is to get a big picture. So we should understand the goal of the study, the population that's under study, and whether the study was an observational or an experiment. So that's the big picture. Consider the next guideline is to consider the source. You want to look for potential sources of bias on the part of the researchers. We'll see some situations where that could come in, but always consider the source. Look for bias in the sample. Decide whether the sampling method was likely to produce a representative sample or the sampling method could cause there to be bias in the study. See if there's some problems defining or measuring the variables of interest. And the variable of interest is just what are you wanting to find out about that population. It should be very understandable and easy to interpret that variable of interest. Okay, beware of confounding variables. We won't do much with that, but sometimes when you're doing a study, there may be an undercurrent that's affecting your results that you didn't plan for. A big thing here is consider the setting and consider the wording of the survey, because wordings can sometimes be misleading and prove to give you a dishonest response. See that the results are presented fairly, and stand back and consider the conclusions. Evaluate where the study achieved its goals. If so, do the conclusions make sense and have a practical significance? We're not going to look at all 8 of these, but let's look at some ways some items might come up. So what I did is I printed off the homework, and we're just going to go through the homework together and see how these guidelines might be presented. So here is the homework from section 5B. First one is, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say pause the video, read it, come up with an answer, then we'll go through it together. And I'll do that for all 12 of these questions. So pause the video. So the study is designed to learn about the social networks of all college freshmen. The researchers randomly interviewed students living in on-campus dormitories. So the question is, how will the study suffer due to the way that the sample was chosen? Well, if the goal is to learn about the social networks of all college freshmen, but they only chose to interview those living in on-campus dormitories, that is not a representative sample of all college freshmen. Some commute, some live on campus, some live in apartments. So this particular study would suffer from selection bias. Selecting students living in on-campus dormitories may not accurately reflect the population. And since we wanted all college freshmen and we only chose those in the dormitories, we would have selection bias. We did not pick the best selection for our sample. Okay, so now read through number 2, pause it, get an answer, and then come back. Let's consider this situation where the weights of 6-year-olds are measured. The question is, what is the variable of interest in this study? What are they trying to measure? They're trying to measure the weights of 6-year-olds. So, of the answers given here, the weights of 6-year-olds is our variable of interest, not the weight of the heaviest 6-year-old or the lightest 6-year-old or their ages. It's the weight of 6-year-olds. Okay, pause it, read number 3, and then come back. The answer here is E. We're surveying randomly selected people who have used sunscreen and found that they were more likely to have been sunburned in the past year. If you read through these different options, you'll realize that people who use sunscreen are more likely to spend time in the sun. Therefore, they're more likely to have been sunburned in the last year. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Pause it, read it, pause it, and then we'll check your answer. So what is a self-selected survey? After reading all the responses that were your options as an answer, F is the better one. It's a survey where people decide for themselves whether to be part of the survey. They self-select to answer the survey. All right, number 5, read it, pause it. So what do you think about number 5? Selection bias and participation bias. 2 important words. Selection is the researcher is selecting people. Participation is you. Do you choose to participate? Selection bias occurs when the researchers select their sample in a biased way. For instance, suppose I was interested in the average height of UALR students. My sample I chose came from basketball players. Do you think that would be biased? Sure it would be, because basketball players are taller than most people, so my results would not be accurate for the UALR population. So it's selected a certain way, there's bias. Participation bias occurs anytime, and it's because you choose to participate in a study. It's voluntary. So whenever a study is done, there will always be some type of participation bias. Okay, let's do number 6. Pause it, do 6. Number 6 asks, what do we mean by the variables of interest in a study? Basically, the variables of interest in a study are the items or quantities that the study seeks to measure. So the variable of interest is what I want to measure. All right, here's number 7. Pause it, work on it. Does the statement make sense, or is it clearly false? Let's explain the reasoning. So the survey of religious beliefs suffered from selection bias because the questionnaires were handed out only at Catholic churches. This statement makes sense. If I am interested in religious beliefs, I need to survey more than just one religion. So it makes sense that there's bias, and it's because no religions other than Catholicism will be represented in the responses. Okay, there's 8. Read it, work it. So what are your thoughts on number 8? Is there a reason to question the results of the method? So here's what we've got. A survey of hourly wages of fast food workers in a large city samples 20 workers from each of 10 fast food restaurants. So 20 workers from 10 fast food restaurants. The question is, would this be valid? I think the method would be valid because they have a sample that's large and diverse. They have 10 different fast food restaurants, and they're taking 20 workers from each. Okay, number 9. Read it, work it, pause it. So, do we have reason to question the results of this following survey or study? A study by a conservative foundation, and realize that conservative usually refers to Republican, Republican politics. Gosh, I can't talk. So, a study by a Republican foundation is designed to assess a new Democratic spending plan. There is some controversy there, and I would say there's reason to question the results. There's possibly some bias in the study. Again, because a Republican foundation is assessing a Democratic spending plan. All right, number 10, pause it, read it, work it. So, what do you think about this one? Researchers conclude that body mass index is the single most important factor in predicting the performance of world-class swimmers. Actually, I don't think we should base performance on one single attribute, in this case, body mass. I don't think it's valid. I think other factors should be considered. All right, here's 11. Pause, work it, and then come. This one's interesting. So, is it valid, not valid? If it's not valid, why? Let's see. I say it's not valid. The question is to gauge public opinion on whether there should be a constitutional amendment to ban capital punishment. A survey asked people, do you support legalized murder? This is a situation where the question being asked can be misleading, and the question could cause the results to be biased. I would say it's not valid. The survey question is leading. What would be a better way to ask that question? Instead of do you support legalized murder, how about do you support, the question here was capital punishment. So don't put a spin on those words because you're trying to receive a certain response. Okay, last question. Pause it, work it, come back. Okay, last problem to wrap up this section 5B. What did you notice? Who was funding this survey? Well, the study received funding from a candy company and a chocolate manufacturer. And what were the results of the study? Regular consumption of food rich in flavonoids may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. Well, chocolate is rich in flavonoids. So there's a conflict of interest here because the study received funding from a chocolate company, which is stating that chocolate is good, that may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. So the answer would be B. Researchers may have been more inclined to provide favorable results because funding was provided by a party with a definite interest. So that's it for 5B. You'll see these same type of questions when you go to the homework in my math lab. Please let me know if you have any questions.